This is another episode of Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. And now the architects, Doug Pat and Stephen Chung.
You are listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. We are both architects and we're here to help you design your dream home. Good morning, Doug.
Stephen, it's nice to see you, man.
It's nice to see you. I know you visited Boston recently.
Oh my gosh, we saw Hamilton and lots of super cool architecture. I dragged my girls all over the city. I'm looking at buildings. But man, what an amazing city. I've been there one time before, but not for long. I got to see so much, and I just kept thinking, Stephen lives in a really cool place.
I never go there, though. I gave you a walking tour. You could see some really nice architecture in probably half a mile or less than that. Just a quick little promenade where you could see some really interesting architecture and then end up on the waterfront and then have some gelato with your kids. So I think that if you did any of that, I think you would have had a good time. Yeah,
it was great, man. Thanks for asking.
All right, so today I'm pretty psyched because we've not really talked about this during our podcast, and Illya Azaroff from Plus Lab is someone I've met at different conferences, and he's always there talking about resilience, and we're going to ask him to explain what that is. But yeah, I mean, I think he's an expert in this space. It has to do with I'll let him explain, but he has got an office in Brooklyn. It's called Plus Lab. They do all sorts of things besides his expertise in resilience. He does residential, he does installations, he looks like he's doing some commercial space. So he does a lot of different work. But again, I really kind of know him as the resilience expert. So I kind of wanted to talk to him about that. So Illya, are you there?
Yeah. Hey guys, how you doing?
Good,
Awesome.
Illya. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. Hey, Illya, explain what resilience is, because it's a big buzzword in architecture, but probably for maybe a typical homeowner, they don't know what that means as it relates to architecture. What does resilience mean?
Yeah, for the homeowner, I think it's important that we talk about resilience in the context of being able to withstand shocks and stresses and keep yourself safe from those circumstances. You know, for architects, it's really about bouncing back from those shocks and stresses in a very good way. So that's kind of the simplest form of talking about resilience.
Are you talking about like weather? Are you talking about, I don't know, security? Like what are we talking about?
Oh, that's great. Great question. So for all shocks and stresses, you look at natural and man-made. So it could be storms of all various types. You know, here in the Northeast, we have extreme heat, extreme cold, of late hurricanes, unfortunately. But all shocks and stresses include, things like, wildfires and mudslides and things you see out west. In the middle of the country, you see a lot of tornadoes and trade shows and other events. So it's all of those shocks and stresses, including security, as you mentioned, Stephen. But it is a full spectrum of elements. And when you get at a holistic approach, or you kind of look at all of these things together, then you can really approach how you make a better house or a better building.
Let's go back a little bit now. Let's say before you got into this subject matter, I mean, how did you become an architect, or why did you become an architect? And then I'm sort of curious to how you got into this really this topic. So take me back to kind of, when did you want to become an architect, and where did you go to school, and where did you work, and how did you kind of find yourself in this place?
Yeah, wow, that's a good question. I sometimes think about this. I grew up in the Midwest. My father, he was a war refugee, and he was in a forced labor camp as a child under the Nazis. And so he is one of those people that have experienced man-made disaster, displacement, hunger, all of those things. So growing up in a household with parents like they wanted to help people anytime that there was any issues or problems. They wanted to give back to community. So growing up that way in the Midwest and in Nebraska, we're at the very top of Tornado Alley. So we witnessed flood and riverine flood and tornadoes occasionally, and we would be out helping folks recover. And I kind of grew up that way. And from his engineering side, he always referred to me as an architectural engineer, but I was really more involved in the arts, and I really loved incredible spaces and how you bring art and happiness to people. So coupled with those two things, I started to think about what would be a good place for me as I was approaching college, and it seemed like I would try out various courses of study, and one happened to be architecture, and it was a good fit. Seeing what could be produced for the built environment, and later on kind of realized that those circumstances of helping communities and how I grew up kind of played into that.
And so where did you study? Where did you do your undergraduate study?
Oh, great. Yeah, undergraduate, I went to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and graduate school out here in New York City at Pratt Institute.
And you're in Brooklyn now?
I am, yeah. In between, I worked overseas in Germany, Italy, and Holland, and traveled quite a bit, and found myself coming back to the States for graduate school somewhere in the mid-'90s, and decided to run into my future wife here in New York City, and that was it. I ended up staying here.
And so was it in graduate school where you were able to kind of narrow your focus in on this resilience topic, or is that something after?
There was some of that in graduate school, looking at transformative architecture and deployable architecture. So some of the first instances of how I was involved was really looking at how do you make a better disaster relief shelter. So you see around the world where you see tents and blue tarps deployed. My initial interest in this was, we can do better. We can design something that's much better, quicker to deploy, lightweight, has no waste at the other end, and get that out there. So I started that in graduate school, and I also teach at the New York City College of Technology in Brooklyn, part of the CUNY system. And I brought that into the curriculum and have run a curriculum that really looks at designing better disaster relief shelters, by extension, to other buildings and other building typologies, and looking at how to build or teach people how to build better buildings with regards to shocks and stresses. And that led me to a lot of other circumstances. So I'm also one of those relied upon experts subcontracting with FEMA, working with the Natural Disaster Preparedness Training Center out of Hawaii, one of their educators teaching people how to build hurricane-proof sheltering systems for cities, and working with Cal EMA, the emergency management out there, with post-disaster assessments. In the post-disaster, it's quite interesting. After we look at buildings and forensically kind of understand what went wrong. And that informs the next series of building codes. How do we make better codes so those shocks and stresses are no longer shocks and stresses to buildings? So the trajectory from graduate school to further education has been quite a lot of fun. Great learning experience.
Doug, why don't you, I see you pondering.
Yeah, I'm thinking about so many different things. I find it wonderful that the experience of your father, your family, affected your choice of profession, or maybe not even your choice of profession as much as what you do within this field of architecture. And I've never run across anybody that works in this realm, and so it all sounds very, very interesting. In fact, I'd love to talk with you further about disaster shelters. I actually designed one many years ago, but never took it to anybody. But that's for another time. What I'm thinking about is how you're clearly in a space that is very important right now in this time in history. And the fact that you can talk to so many people all over the world instantaneously is clearly very helpful to communities outside of your own. So again, that's profound, particularly within the last 15 or 20 years in the advent of social media and the internet, essentially. But I'm just wondering, how do your clients at your firm find you? How do they come to understand exactly what you're doing, and how are you incorporating the work that you do, your specialty, in the architecture that you're making?
Well, that's a great question. The first part of it is about the clients. Some of my clients are other architecture firms that really want to gain this expertise. And so going in and doing training and giving them an understanding of where to find and how to do is part of that. And the other clients that we have, another leg of those clients, happen to be city agencies, communities, community groups that really need to understand how you build long-term resilience into their properties or what have you. So a lot of the documents you see coming out of New York City, some of the things at Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities, and some not-for-profit groups that work in this fields or this arena, such as the Federal Alliance Safe Homes. I'm one of their expert advisors, and I help write a lot of the documents coming out.
Wow.
So that's part of my clientele. And in fact, since Hurricane Sandy, that part of the business in terms of consulting has grown enormously, and we're happy to do that. You can't. There's so many architects that need to get into this space, and there's so much work that needs to be done. Now, the other clients that are recommended to us from past clients, those are the homeowners and business owners and commercial property owners that we work with all the time. And we go through a process which is called THAM. It's a threat and hazard analysis system that we learned through working with the federal government and HHS. And we use that to get an all-hazard assessment. And we can demonstrate to clients, here's what your exposure is over the life cycle of your building, or here's what your exposure is over the life cycle of your mortgage, whichever one is more relevant. And they can see the value in building better and spending a little more money up front. So that has really paid a lot of dividends, because once we satisfy one client, they tell a lot of folks about us, and we just kind of keep going,
So Illya, let's say that I'm designing a house in Florida, and I am, and it's in a floodplain. And would another architect or would a client maybe reach out to you and say, hey, listen, this is a place that has a lot of weather events, and, yes, I'm building to code, but I'd really like you to take a look and see if you can't give us some advice as to how to make this a bit more weatherproof is the right word, but just to kind of plan for things that might come up, or whether it's reinforcing the structure or just how to deal with these events. Is that something you would do or advise?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We get a lot of that kind of a call right away. We can advise on several items just in that circumstance that you described. If you're building already in a floodplain and you're building to code, two triggers immediately come about. One is, why are you building in a floodplain? And I know it's very hard not to do that in Florida. Understanding that you can, in the short term, defeat that floodplain, but eventually the value of your building may drop, and we can give circumstances for that. But then how to really reinforce your building to shocks and stresses, the main wind force resisting system, components and cladding. We have that expertise down, and to code in Florida means a lot, something different than it does to the rest of the United States. Miami-Dade County has the best building code in the states, and has really done a good job in bringing their code well beyond what the national standard is. But if you're outside of Miami-Dade, say in the Panhandle where Hurricane Michael just hit, the codes are very lax in comparison to Miami-Dade. But those codes are pretty robust compared to the rest of the U.S., and you can see the difference. So we could absolutely do that. We often look at building beyond code, and we advise to build beyond code with a demonstrated return on investment for those elements of your building. And if you can't get at it, I think this is what's important to this show and the homeowners, is when you have upgrades to your existing property or that house over time, and you can't maybe afford it at the beginning, just to have an understanding of what you should do first, second, and third to improve your chances against shocks and stresses or build resilience in over time.
Illya, what did you hear about this one homeowner, this one house that was designed by, I guess, an architect and engineer in the last weather event in Florida that was the only one kind of remaining? I mean, I saw it on CNN or something. I was just like one house of the entire town was sort of left, I don't know, untouched, but definitely left standing. Did you hear anything about that?
I did, yeah, and I have had a lot of inquiry about that house.
Oh, really?
And I think it's really wonderful to see an example that architects make a difference, building beyond building code make a difference, and that we know how to make resilient homes that will survive shocks and stresses. So that's what I take away from that house. Now, there is one other thing that it's really important that people understand is that house was built for some very wealthy people. Resilience is available and affordable to everyone. So the house doesn't have to look different. It doesn't have to be for only wealthy people. It can be had by everyone. And that's the other takeaway that I was very happy to join you today, is to try to get that message out, is that it's a good example, but we can also build for everybody.
Well, how would you do that? Give some examples of how you would build, let's say, affordably, but being aware, thinking about all of these resilience issues that you're talking about.
We've just, as an example, we've just completed a house in the Rockaway Peninsula in New York City, one of the most exposed areas, and it is a 1,200 square foot house. It's called the Hurricane Strong Home, and we've done this with the Federal Alliance of Safe Homes out of Florida, not for profit. They have a lot of guidance for homeowners, a lot of manuals, free downloads that really show folks how to get at resilience, even with an existing home. And so if you want to check out the Hurricane Strong Home, it's #Hurricane Strong. You take a look at it, there's a whole build. We're going to be sharing those documents with anybody who wants to download them for free, because everybody needs to get at resilience. But the other thing is, here's a couple of simple things. When you're thinking about your envelope of your house, upgrading your windows to hurricane impact windows or wind impact windows is pretty easy to do, but sometimes expensive. So does your building engender an architecture that will allow for you to put something like roll down shutters or an exterior shutter system that will protect it from those kinds of shocks and flying debris? Another one, a simple one is a good recommendation, is instead of an in-swinging door to your home, is an out-swinging door. There's a reason it's called a storm door. The storm door is typically the outer swinging door. It's just, think about wind pressure on your door. If you have an in-swinging door, the only thing that's keeping that wind out is the small cross-section of your throw bolt. That's the only thing that's holding it in place. But if the door is out-swinging, it's the entire frame of the door that is in contact and pushing against the wind and the door and the pressure on the door. So those are sort of two quick elements. A third would be some backup power generation that is not just wheeled in, it's something that is hardwired to the house, and those types of things. For your roof, using a ring shank nail versus a common nail has been proven to increase the resistance to any uplift of wind substantially. And Miami-Dade County's building code requires ring shank nails over common nails, which has saved a lot of roof systems. Because once you lose one tile on your roof, then usually you have what's called progressive failure. And once you lose one, then the next, and suddenly the entire roof is going. And with those forces, sometimes your entire subroof goes, or and the rest of your cladding, and you lose enclosure. So those are some of the things that you can do in those circumstances that are quite easy to do. And there's lots of free guidance for it for homeowners to download.
Quickly, what is a ring shank nail as opposed to a regular nail for our listeners?
Sure. If you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or any place, you're going to see common nails and you'll see a ring shank nail. So a ring shank nail has slightly different shape to it and has more resistance in pulling out and has a little bit larger head to it. So it has more contact with any of your layers of waterproofing because of the size of the head. And because of the shape of the nail itself, in terms of its length and the way that it's formed, it actually has more resistance in its when you're trying to pull it back out.
Okay.
The cost of that kind of material is pennies. To what a regular nail is. And so you're talking about a very, very low impact on your budget.
So, and to get in the weeds a little bit for our listeners, so I watched the video in regard to this gentleman who built this house that was really one of the only ones that were left standing, or the only one left standing. And I found a comment he made really interesting. I never thought about this, but he said that these hurricane-proof windows that he had. They might have been triple glazed. The outer two layers of glass in one or two had broken, but the third layer on the interior did not. And so he had these windows were designed for, I think, 140 mile an hour, and the impact of a 140 mile an hour object. And so it breaks the glass, but it doesn't make it all the way inside. And he basically said it's because the wind didn't get to the interior of the building, the house was essentially saved. Could you talk a little bit about why that is?
Yeah, that's great. So I grew up in Tornado Alley, and you were always told, "Hey, open your windows when a tornado's coming." That is absolutely false. It is a wives' tale, and taping your windows is the second wives' tale. None of those things work, and in fact, you leave yourself more vulnerable if you leave your windows open. So a pressure differential is what he's talking about, and progressive failure, either ballooning the interior of the structure with a rapid pressure change, or actually evacuating the air with a rapid pressure change. So opening your windows is not going to help that. In fact, it creates eddies and forces around the windows and openings that will pull your building apart. Wow. So let's go to what he's talking about. What you need to do is maintain enclosure, all your windows and doors shut. And if you do have protection over the windows, like I mentioned, shutters, that's even better. But if you have hurricane rated windows, they're designed to take the impact. The window will be damaged, but maintain enclosure through multiple impacts. And so the pressure differential from the outside to the inside doesn't change rapidly. And that's where you see a lot of houses and roofs get blown off or blow up. If you do see videos of storms in action, you'll see first a few things start to fall away from the house, or a window or impact, and those things will blow up. If you really want to get into this as a design professional, you look at the MAT reports from FEMA. These are the Mitigation Assessment Team reports, and they will show you photo by photo forensics of how and why things failed. And this is one of the most common failures. So I'm glad you brought it up. Maintain enclosure and maintain the pressure differential. Keep that house tight.
Very interesting.
It's funny, Doug, because it's near the end of the year, and for those who don't know, architects have to maintain a certain level of continuing education credits. And so, in order to do mine, I did a bunch of online courses having to do with this subject. Because I was working in Florida, and so I learned all about straps and different kind of anchors and things that I don't really think about as much up in the Northeast. But it's so interesting to think about. These are not necessarily expensive things. These are just things that need to be done during the framing. Basically tying the building down and anchoring it, and just thinking ahead to I guess a lot of wind is really kind of a lot of the issues that happen in that region. And so it's so interesting to hear. This is almost like one of these classes. I feel like we should get credit for this, Doug, because Illya really is an expert in this in this space, and it's fascinating to hear about. And I think as it's amazing. You're amazing resource, Illya. So hopefully you'll have a place that we can send listeners to learn more about these issues, and maybe we can put it on show notes or something on your website. But basically, people can learn more about the things you're talking about, because I think that we often talk about aesthetics or new products or whatever. We're just talking about different things, and this one really is something that everyone should be very aware of, and we often don't talk about it. And I think many architects don't know about it. I mean, it's not something you learn in school. It's really something you have to kind of search out the way you have.
Yeah, no, and to your point, there will be a quiz later just to make sure you get credit on it.
So we will get credit. Okay, we'll petition the AIA. That's wonderful.
But Stephen, what you bring up is the continuous load path, and that's the other element. If there were three elements in this, I think we talked about enclosure, and the second was about resilience and what it really is. But the third one is continuous load path. And this applies to just about everything out there. If you're doing anything with earthquake design to tornado preparations or wind and water design, this idea of continuous load path, as you said, strapping from the top of the roof down to the walls and walls down to the foundation, those anchors and straps and how they are put together, there's a lot of guidance for that. But if you can do that, your house is really fortified and ready for a lot of different cross sections of shocks and stresses. So that is really important to maintain as well. So not just enclosure, but the continuous load path. If you had damage and you replaced your roof, is the roof as an element anchored to the rest of your house? And that's another common place where common construction often is not adequate for the forces we're facing. So I think that's great you bring it up.
And so what's really, I just want to reinforce also, is that for homeowners, is that, I mean, many of the things that Illya is talking about, I mean, this is not necessarily common practices. It's a bit beyond, and I think it's something that architects are not always aware of. I mean, it's just it's another level of knowledge that some are research and look into, and others don't. And it's something as a homeowner you may want to ask about. And if the architect doesn't have an expertise or experience in this area, then it's someone like Illya you bring on as a consultant to help advise. Now, I must say that most of the architects that I met in Florida, they are pretty knowledgeable about the stress that they have to deal with down there. In the Northeast, probably we're worried about different things like snow, let's say. So it's often an architect practicing that area does have a pretty good knowledge base of that what the practices in that place. But for me, doing a project down in the South, this is where I would want to maybe reach out to someone like Illya to say, hey, here's my plans, here are my drawings. Can you take a look or advise or consult? And is that something that also that you would that you're able to offer, Illya? Is that a kind of I don't know if service, but consultation that you can provide?
Yeah, absolutely. We just did one of those exact consultations for someone who's thinking about buying a place. And so it wasn't the purchaser, it was actually the realtor reaching out to us saying, hey, could you verify all of these things so there's some surety in what the homeowner is buying and what they need to look out for? And we just did that for a place up here in the Northeast. And of course, if there's a build going on, we've been doing that for very large projects to very small projects. Yeah, it's great to add that layer of information in.
Doug, any last questions?
Yeah, could you give us again that hashtag? Is it Hurricane Strong that we can look up?
Yeah, hashtag Hurricane Strong, and it should take you to a lot of the build we've been doing. And it's with the Federal Alliance of Safe Homes. It's flash.org. They were our main not-for-profit partner, and they advocate across the United States for teaching homeowners and builders how to build hurricane-strong homes.
Okay.
And they also do a shakeout program. So I'm big fans of theirs. They've been really great resource for people out there. But yeah, take a look at the house. The Breezy Build home on that is our house, and we'll be sharing all the information. Anybody who wants it, happy to give it away. To get at the millions of homes that need this information, you've got to have an impact by volunteering the information, so innovation can happen and fellow design professionals can make our house even better.
Oh, that's great, Illya.
So that was really interesting, Doug. Illya has just gotten off now, and I find the subject really interesting. I didn't used to think so, but it's come up more and more often with these weather events, and it's fascinating to hear kind of his experience growing up and how that informed what he wanted to do later in architecture. And I think it's really interesting, really interesting.
Yeah, what a great story he had about his father. I mean, not a great story, but it was so inspiring to hear that his father and his experience really affected his life in profound ways. And he ends up pursuing, a field within a field, essentially, that really is related to giving back to other human beings, based on this experience, this empathetic experience, where his parents, at the drop of a hat just went out to help people that were suffering. Wow. I mean, profound stuff. So what a neat interview.
I guess you're an engineer. You grew up in Nebraska and Tornado Alley, he said. Then I guess that's something he just sort of part of his experience growing up in upstate New York. I didn't really have that the same kind of issues. So anyway, it's really interesting.
Unbelievable.
Hey, so Doug, the past week, I just wanted to mention, we got a really interesting email, and I just want to read this one because we get a lot of emails, but this one I thought was really intriguing and just wanted to share it with our listeners. This is from Reed Baldwin, and he's someone who built his own dream house. So, hey guys, I recently discovered your podcast and I've been enjoying listening to past episodes. I thought you might be interested in my experiences with my dream home. I'm a recreational pilot and have long dreamed of living on a general aviation airport, the same way boaters dream of living on a lake. He wants to live on an airport.
So cool.
Anyway, a few years ago, we reached a stage where that was financially doable. We purchased a lot, put our existing house on the market, and designed the dream house. Contrary to your advice in episode 5, I designed my house myself. Designed the house myself. I went through dozens of concepts before we settled on a design. And by the way, architects also design many, many concepts before settling on a design. But anyway,
right.
We contracted with a builder, and that was willing to work with me to refine the plans to the level of detail from which he could bid and build the house. We've now been living in the house for 2 years. And he documented the process in a blog called lindenairporthouse.blogspot. Linden, Lindenair, Airport House. lindenairporthouse.blogspot. It's pretty neat, from 2015 to 2017, and it's really a couple of years where he really documented the entire process. He really designed and built his dream home. So it was really cool that he reached out, and I guess he's been listening to what we've been talking about. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, so I went on the site, and this guy he's a pilot, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, you got to be organized. You got to know what you're talking about. So pretty impressive site. When you sent me the email, I was reading through, and right at the end, he says that he learned a lot. And clearly, anybody that takes on this process is going to learn an awful lot. And I was thinking about, that comment. And so, in my mind, and many times, Stephen, we don't try to convince people. Well, we talk about architecture in an intelligent way, and we find that it's very important that people use professionals. They don't necessarily have to be an architect, but that they're going to avoid a lot of the challenges that they will ultimately face if they so choose. And I think I sent you a note about, or a comment in regard to that last sentence in his email about learning an awful lot. And I think if we choose to use a professional, a lot of this learning doesn't have to be come in the form of surprises, right? But rather as kind of measured responses to anticipated questions.
Right.
So
that's a good point.
Yeah. So I think, if somebody goes into this and they are ready to spend a little bit more and for the process to take a little bit longer, and maybe they're going to accept probably a lot more headaches, then, so be it. And I think if you're kind of welcoming in that process, and you don't take everything too seriously, you're going to learn an awful lot, and it's going to be a great experience. But I would say that most people aren't like our friend. I think they get in over their head pretty quickly, and it becomes a real challenge. So, right.
And now, based on talking to Illya, I imagine, there's so much more that I would like to learn. And imagine this guy now, after building his house, listening to this this podcast and thinking, oh man, did I install the right straps for, this place, or just in case, that sort of thing I find really interesting. So, there's always, for us, that we're always learning more and more, and you can't know everything. Although, when you build a lot, like we designed and built a lot, like we both have, you gain a lot of experience. And yes, I'm not as surprised when we approach a new project, and certainly pass that on to the homeowner, and, hey, we should be aware of this, or let's think about that, or that's really costly. You sure want to go that direction because this can happen, and it's sort of what you're paying for. So anyway, it's still admirable. The guy obviously threw himself into this experience and documented the entire process, and everything was perfect, but I think it was something that he really wanted to do, and I think it sounds like he had a fantastic experience overall, and is really happy, and really living out his dream. Right, he's living at an airport, a house on an airport, basically next to an airport field, and I think that's kind of fun.
Well, it's impressive, very impressive. So, and that's the amazing thing about this field, is that there's just so much to know. so many things to learn. It's not like, I'm an accountant and there's a set of rules and we understand it. And so the factors that are changing are all the numbers that are coming in from the various clients. Like, this is just, it's endless. The amount of things that you've got to know.
So if there's any accountants that listen, that was Doug that said that, not
me. All right, maybe.
All right.
That wasn't the best example. You've been listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. So remember to shoot us an email with your questions. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to next time.